What follows is a video tutorial that introduces you to the Pro Tools 10 MIDI editor. For additional content and instruction, please check out these other tutorial videos available in the lab and online at the addresses shown. In this tutorial, we will learn how to open the MIDI editor window and take a tour of some of the tools and functions within. I have a sequence here with some instrument tracks and MIDI tracks. So far, we've done our MIDI editing directly in the editor window by viewing notes and expanding this track and editing in this way. If we open the MIDI editor, we have a more detailed view that's similar to this, plus we can switch over to notation view and edit what looks like actual music notation. So to open the MIDI editor window, we can go to Windows, MIDI editor, opens that way, or the faster way is to choose Control and equal. Notice that I have just the sitar lead track highlighted. So I'll hit Control equal. There's our MIDI editor. We see the list of all the tracks as we did in the editor window. Notice the dots along the left and the pencil on the right. The dot on the left says what is currently visible in the MIDI editor window, and the pencil on the right tells us what is currently editable, which track. So I can actually click on dots, and as you can see, we saw more MIDI notes come up. We're actually looking at these three MIDI tracks together superimposed upon each other. It's a little hard to tell which track is which, but if I click this button here, this highlights each track, its data in a different color. So here's our sitar lead, sitar comp, and down here some percussion sounds in green. But even with all the tracks visible, only one can be editable at a time. So I would need to move my pencil tool to make one of the tracks editable. Notice that the color of the keyboard here changes as I click the pencil, and notice that it matches the color of the track in the edit window. Keyboard now is the color of this track. Now the keyboard's the color for this track. So another way to know what you're editing and relate it to the edit window. Okay, another way to quickly open the edit window and have everything visible, or just selected tracks visible, is to select them here. I'll hold down the Option key, select all, or do the same to all, selected all tracks. Now when I do Control equal, open the Edit MIDI editor window, it says they're all highlighted. It says sitar lead and 4 other tracks. Notice also the bar along the side of the keyboard is black. If I take all these away, just view one, now this bar looks just like the bar on the track in the edit window. So that's kind of telling us we're just editing one track. This is probably the most common way to use the MIDI editor, is just one track at a time. Okay, you can have multiple edit windows open, just depending on what you have highlighted and what the focus is, or the target. So let's jump to this button right over here, this little red button. That's the target window. That means that this is the one that's going to receive any key commands or anything like that. If we turn target off, we can open other edit windows. So instead of looking at all your MIDI tracks layered in one window, you can have a MIDI editor for each track. So this one's set up for sitar lead, so I'm going to Option click and choose this track, the sitar comp track, and I'll do the same thing. I'll do Control equal. Now we have two MIDI editor windows, so I could jump back and forth, edit sitar lead, sitar comp, and notice only one of these windows has the target enabled, so you have one target window at a time. So I can disable that, enable this one. If I try to open a MIDI editor with this target enabled, it'll just open the same MIDI editor window. Okay, so you'll want to disable that if you want to open additional MIDI editors. Okay, let's take a little tour of some of the tools here. First off, this window here, this is the notation display button. So if I click on that button, it actually will change to display the notation. Now this isn't something you would print out. This is just purely to edit in what looks like music notation, which can be handy. There's a separate score editor window for printing scores. We'll look at that in a later tutorial. But you can work with the actual music notes now and drag them and move them depending on your settings up here. Go back to the piano scroll view. We have the tools that look very similar to the toolbar in our main edit window up here. Some things are a little bit different, but basically the same. You can shrink this view so you can see more stuff along the top of the editor window. If I go to selection display, and it's right now it's an expanded edit tools, I can shrink that, click that, and now we see just this one button for the tools. If I click that, then I can select them in that way. That's kind of a nice setting because now you can see more entries up at the top. We have our same edit mode buttons. Notice they're independent of the other edit mode buttons, so you can leave your main edit window in one edit mode and move this one maybe to slip mode or something like that. This information here has to do with what the pencil tool will do. It's saying the pencil tool will draw in the sitar lead MIDI track or instrument track. Let's go to the pencil tool for a moment, and it says the default value for the pencil here. So if I click a new note, it'll make it exactly a quarter note. I'm in grid mode, so it snaps right to the grid. I could change this then if I wanted to have a half note and make sure that the follow grid is turned off. Now if I click, it makes a note that's exactly a half note. Okay. So these have to do with what's going to happen with the pencil tool. You can also say follow grid, and then this value will be whatever the grid is selected over here. Okay, this value here shows where my cursor is. You can see it changing as I move up the notes and to different locations. This tells us what the selection is. So if I select a note like this, this tells me it's F3, and it tells me the on velocity and when that note starts. So I can actually do some moving in this window. If I change a value here, like to beat 1, my note jumps to beat 1. Beat 3, return, the note jumps to beat 3. So this is kind of like using an event list, and you can see it right away. That's the value for this note. I can make adjustments up here. Next is the grid. This shows the value for if I was to drag the snap to grid value. You can of course change that. You'll see the grid lines change. And the nudge value can be shown here as well. Or if you want to look at them both, you can do expanded. Now we're seeing the grid value and the nudge. Okay, let's drag everything into view. Okay, we can click on the keyboard, get a little preview of notes, just like in the edit window. Let's look at some of these playlists down at the bottom. We could expand our track to see these multiple playlists in the edit window, but they're more involved here for MIDI. So right now we're looking at the velocity for these notes. I could add another playlist if I wanted to and choose a value. Let's say I choose pitch bend. I know this track has some pitch bend, and we see a playlist for pitch bend as well. So we can do editing, which we'll do in a later tutorial of that. And that's the basic view of the MIDI editor window. Let's look at one other way to view this window. We're seeing it as a floating window. But if you like your windows to be consolidated, in other words, all in one window, you can choose to open the MIDI editor from this little mini menu in the editor window. Let's see, I'll highlight sitar lead, choose MIDI editor, and now we see the MIDI editor is attached to the main edit window. So you can jump back and forth in that way if that's more convenient for you. We can close it out by deselecting it here.